And I personally see it as a bad thing for partisanship, but I think it's a great thing for we, the people. I think that as voting blocks are starting to intertwine, you're starting to see people who originally supported Bernie Sanders is now supporting President Trump. We're seeing Republicans who were hardcore MAGA people now supporting Kamala. We're seeing people like Candace Owens, who was so outside of the progressive side. I mean, young people hated her. Now, because she's kind of aligned a little bit with the pro-Palestinian push, you see that they're starting to support her. So there's like this huge intertwining that's happening, and it's happening publicly and on Front Street, right? So welcome to the Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family and gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. So if you're on the radio, you're listening to Extra 106.3. If you are on Rumble, YouTube, or all the other stuff, and you're watching this video podcast, and I thank you so much. Please, please, please remember, if you haven't already, to like, share, comment, subscribe, all of the above. It'd be so much appreciated. And I am so grateful. It is free to you, but it absolutely helps me. And so thank you. Woo! The 2024 elections. This presidential election cycle. Let me tell you something. I have been in politics now for over a decade. I am fastly approaching the 20-year mark of being in politics. And I'm getting a lot older, but I've also seen a lot. I have witnessed a lot. I have been a part of the behind the scenes. I have seen people come into the game, leave the game. I've seen just so much. And coming in the way I came in through the grassroots, through interning, it allows you, or I should say, it affords you the opportunity to see behind the veil in a way that a lot of people just don't have that opportunity. And it's what you do with it. You know, I always tell this story about how I had the option one time of helping with a major event that was taking place with the GOP. And the option was I could, you know, kind of float around and assist, or I could sit at the front of the VIP and check people in. And there were a lot of people, a lot of interns who didn't want to check people in at the VIP table or any table because it really reflects that you're there working. You're not necessarily there with like everyone else and kind of mingling around. And, you know, there's this whole idea of you're working versus being part of the game or part of the players. And so, but I remember getting some great advice, which was, no, you take that check-in table. I mean, that's how you put names with faces. It's how you learn things. So that's kind of how I started, by just doing a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the work assisting, and just working on trying to help people become more and more or grow in politics, whether they're running for office or they're working behind the scenes, whatever it is. You know, I was just there to help. And I feel like when you're the help, you get all the information. So it really gave me a lot of insight. And as I'm looking at this presidential race, there's something that I have learned to trust when I am looking at politics, and that's momentum. You know, when you're working the table, you hear the conversations of people just kind of waiting as you're trying to find their name, or the next person beside you may be looking to find someone else's name, and you see those two, the person you're helping, the person they're helping, starts interacting. And then next thing you know, you find yourself in the situation where you are able to, you know, observe and pick up information and get the vibe. And most importantly, you can feel the momentum. And so that was something that really stood out to me during the just working behind the scenes, is momentum. And it never failed. Whenever election day got there, the person that had all the energy, the excitement, is typically the candidate who you find winning. And so I trust that formula a lot, and it hasn't let me down. So why am I talking about that as it relates to 2024? Because I am trying to find the momentum. I'm trying to see which candidate has the edge, and then who can maintain the edge. And it kind of goes back and forth, right? I think President Trump has maintained the edge for a very, very long time. And then you have, people who can say that right now, Kamala is maintaining the edge. And, but that's also that has a lot to do with the fact that she is a bit in a honeymoon stage. She's new, she's fresh. Everyone wants to know. All the media is writing about her. She's getting all the attention right now. So as I've said before in a media hit that you can find, if you're on YouTube, you can go and find it. But as I said before in that media hit, obtaining momentum is not as difficult as maintaining it. You can obtain it by, doing a switcheroo like what the Democrats did. And now all of a sudden Kamala has all this momentum. Or, when you have 91 indictments that you're facing, that will certainly gain some momentum. But maintaining it along the way is where the challenge comes in. So that being said, there was like two big moves that took place. President Trump picked his VP, which was JD Vance. And then you saw Kamala Harris, come in and then switch out from, Biden to her. And so, and I have really strong feelings about both of these individuals, and we're just going to bring it to the table. So welcome to my table. And I look forward to continuing this discussion. I think that it's time for us to dig a little bit deeper. I haven't commented as of yet. This is the first time I am publicly commenting on how I feel about our vice president pick, as well as how I feel about Kamala Harris. I think with her more so than JD Vance, I have thrown out little fillers, and I think people know that I'm not supporting her. But I haven't really went deep or dug deep into why I feel the way I feel. So you've only seen maybe a couple of 30-second clips. That being said, I plan to do that right now on this podcast. So stay tuned. Welcome to the table. Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. Okay, so first up, let me give you my thoughts on all of this as a whole. So this is as of August of 2024. I don't know when you're watching this, but this is of August 2024. We have the RNC has already taken place. Trump has already debated Biden, and it was terrible. Kamala has already been flipped in, and so now she is off the bench and in the game, and Biden is on the bench. The DNC, the Democrat National Convention, is already taking place. We're in the middle of it, actually. So it's actually getting ready to end. But President Obama has already spoken. Michelle Obama has already spoken. And those are the two that I really was listening for. And I'm going to get into how I felt about their speeches as well. As well as President Trump has already survived a assassination attempt, which I thought was just, beyond me. This is the first assassination attempt I think I've witnessed in my lifetime, and I'll be 40 this year. So that ought to tell you how rare these moments are. And the fact that it missed him by such a small percentage, it's really beyond me.
Take a look at what happened.
It's just really beyond me. But either way, I think that that's been talked about so much. People are still debating on whether or not that was something that should have happened. Obviously, nothing like that should happen when you have the Secret Service present. But I do have some concerns. And I tend to be one of those people who feel like I am not a fan of female Secret Service officers. And I'm going to tell you why. It's mainly because of the fact that I find it really hard to, or I find it really difficult to convince or to be convinced that a woman who may be 5'7" can protect my 6'2" husband. I'm not saying that she can't have specialized skills and all those things, but strength is strength. And when I saw the pictures of President Trump finally standing, and there were a couple of women around him, and those women weren't tall enough to block him, I'm asking myself, well, what are you protecting him from? You know, his head is like wide open and exposed. So, you know, I just feel like that puts him at a disadvantage. And if you're supposed to be protecting him, I don't know, like it's just weird to me. So I have a problem with that. And then I'm be honest, I feel a lot more safe when I'm with my husband, who's a man, than I do another woman. I just do. So call it a mental thing, whatever. I'm misogynistic, even though I'm a woman. However, I don't really care. I have my take on these things. And I do believe that there are certain roles that women should play and certain roles that men should play. And not because I think that either or can't do the other, but because of the fact that there's just certain skill sets. We're certainly equipped in a unique way as women and as men. And I really want to see us flourish in our strengths rather than trying to compete with the other side, the other gender. Call it the soft life, whatever. I am a soft girl. I'm not that girl. But either way, have it however you want to put it. The assassination attempt happened. People are debating it, and it will continue to be a debate. The RNC has already held their national convention, and let me tell you, it was successful. I mean, whether there are a lot of people who may have speculation on whether they liked it or not, who cares? The point is, overall, it was a successful convention. And during that time, Trump announced that his running mate was going to be JD Vance. And his introduction came with a lot of controversy, mostly because of the fact that people really didn't know exactly who he is. He's only been in the Senate for 2 years. He was elected in 2022. He is my age. I'm pretty sure, I think he's 40 now. But you know, yeah, we both was born the same year. So I'll be 40 this year, December. So it's just, I mean, people just don't know who he is. So who is he? And is he helping or is he hurting the Trump campaign? That's a question that we're going to discuss in this podcast, as well as we're going to talk about Kamala. So she has her record and her strategy to take on Trump, and she is working it. Okay. However, there are some issues around her career, some issues obviously around this administration that I believe is going to hold her back a bit. So we're going to also discuss that, dive a little deep into that. But I do think there's a greater threat. I've mentioned it in an earlier podcast. I think the greatest threat that we're going to deal with when it comes to both of these campaigns is apathy. It's apathy. And it's a lot of it has to do with a lot of the decisions that both campaigns are making. And it doesn't feel like they're listening to the majority of people. It kind of feels like each campaign is listening to both of their sides. And I don't know how that's going to pan out, but we'll get into that and discuss that deeper. Lastly, I'm going to close with what I believe is our absolute greatest threat, which is apathy. I'm going to talk about why that's a great threat and how we're going about dealing with it. I think people know that apathy is on the table, but I don't think we understand how, you play a role in increasing that when you respond emotionally to things. So we're going to talk about that and just my overall view. If I had to choose today, who do I think is going to win? I'm going to talk about that as well. So stay tuned. But before we go into JD Vance and Kamala, I want to give you a little bit of a glance into some of the issues or some of the things that I think are important to talk about, a glimpse into the state of this election as a whole. So after the coup that we saw take place, because it was a coup that got Biden out, and there's a podcaster I listen to. Her name is Kim Iverson. My dad actually told me about her, and I really like her. At first, I wasn't really listening because I was just kind of like, okay, my dad is a little bit more far right than me. these days. So I wasn't sure if, I don't know. I don't know. I'm like, okay, Dad. But because he recommended it, I knew I was going to watch it at some point. And so I started listening to her, and I reference a little bit of her in this podcast, but I really like how she brought out an interesting point. She talked about how this coup that took place with Joe Biden, and what do we mean by coup? Well, it was Pelosi and Schumer and probably the Obamas or whoever else. They all kind of came together and really pushed him out. I mean, I don't think Biden left freely. I feel like they pushed him out, and they continue to plant these little seeds in the media. I mean, they fed off of the whole notion that he's older. And then obviously they had the ammunition to push him out once he had that first debate and did so badly. I think at that point they knew that it was time. So, but the game changed, and so did the political focus in the election cycle. But there are some key issues that are on the table in this 2024 campaign, whether you like it or not. It's on the table. So what am I talking about? Key issues like the economy. Well, we know the economy is on the table. Like, we know this is something that is absolutely going to be a major, major issue. So we have the economy. Both candidates are talking about that. Healthcare. I'm not hearing a lot of conversation on the Republican side about healthcare, and I'm only hearing minimal conversation on the Democrat side about healthcare outside of prescription costs and things like that. I'm not hearing a lot about just the overall cost of healthcare. I do think that our cost is a bit astronomical is the word I'm looking for. Astronomical. I think our cost is a bit astronomical. And the reason why I believe that is because there is a bit of a grip on our healthcare that doesn't allow the market to breathe. It doesn't allow it to stretch. It doesn't allow capitalism to take place in our healthcare. And for those of you who hate capitalism, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. Because capitalism's gotten a bad rep, but capitalism is why we're number one in America. It's why a lot of people are winning. It's why a lot of people came out of poverty. So capitalism is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Can it be abused like anything else? Absolutely, but it's not a bad thing. That being said, I do think that there is something to be said around healthcare and allowing the market to work even in our healthcare system. I would like to hear Republicans talk about that more. Immigration is going to be on the table because it's in our faces. You have about 10 million plus illegal people here, illegal immigrants or migrants here in America. And we have to talk about it. I mean, I don't know, like, these are human beings. They have to eat, they have to poop, they have to sleep, they have to do all the same things that we are all doing. So that being said, we have to make sure that they are provided for and to a certain extent. And I mean, the government's already stretched. It's already stretched. We're in a deficit. So that's something that's on the table. Climate change, environmental issues is certainly on the table. I don't hear Republicans talking about it as much, although we have to acknowledge it. I know I mentioned in the previous podcast how Jared Kushner invested, I believe it was like upwards to amount of I think it was $100 million into this solar company that is ran by, it's called Mosaic, and it's a solar financing company. So I think that's a huge investment for into some of these environmental issues. So obviously it is being discussed privately on the Republican side or the Trump side. However, I'm really interested to see what happens overall when it comes to the Republicans on climate and environmental issues. But the Democrats are always talking about it. So, and then lastly, we have social issues. So we're always going to have these social issues, right? What do I mean by social issues? Abortion, race relations, things like that. That's always going to be on the table. However, the strategy has shifted from Biden trying to convince us that his past performance has been beneficial to now having Harris having to prove that she has the incompetence to carry out this huge ordeal of running an entire country, particularly the United States. So considering how long it took the Obamas to endorse her, I'm pretty certain that there is a lack of faith in her that is having to be grown even on the Democrat side. But before we switch, or before there was this big switch from Biden to Kamala, public opinion has fluctuated throughout this cycle, both between Biden and Trump, and it's been something that we've seen way across the board, varying from different levels of support as well as extreme criticisms on both sides of the aisle. And I think we're to the point now where we're kind of accustomed to it. I think we're just kind of know that this is what it is. And the media coverage has just been horrible, particularly with the debates or not debating. It's just been a mess, right? So I believe that public perception has played a critical role in shaping how we see things. And that's how it is typically in every presidential election. But this one feels a lot more public. It feels like a lot of people are talking about it. Oftentimes you would have your voters that would kind of only show up within the first couple of weeks, or maybe after Labor Day, we'll see a lot of voters kind of wake up and start getting involved politically. But it's just changing. It's not the same anymore. And I think it's important to know that when we went into the general election, we went into that understanding that 70% of voters did not support or feel excited about either one of these candidates, Trump or Biden. Now, this is before Harris was in there, but we went into this race, into the general, with that data point. And I don't think a lot of people took it seriously, but it apparently was serious. So Harris hasn't gained as much as I think, people want her to gain. However, looking at some of these polls, she has cracked 50%. And that's something that is extremely interesting to me. So as I said, we're sitting in mid-August of 2024. And the latest poll that I saw, I think, or on average, had Harris leading Trump at 46% to 43%. A lot of people are saying that this is her honeymoon phase, that, that's what the uptick is. But I've seen some polls where she's cracked 50%. And that's a bit concerning as well. But I find it interesting that RFK is sitting at 5%. And I think that is huge, particularly considering the fact that he is pulling from the Republican side, which is something I said very early on. And people were shouting me down. And I kept saying, stop saying that RFK is going to pull from the Democrats. Stop saying that. The issues, you got to listen to what he's saying. You got to listen to what he's talking about. The issues that he was talking about are issues that Republicans are talking about. Republicans were the ones who felt like they did not want to get the jab. It was Republicans who's anti the jab. It's Republicans who are really focusing in on, what are we eating, homesteading. It's a lot of conservatives that are pushing a lot of those things. So if you really listen to what he's saying and not what party he represented, then you can see that he was clearly going to pull from Republicans. But I digress. Let's move on. That being said, what I am watching is what all of this means. Like, what does this mean in the grand scale of everything, right? Like, how does this affect the complete outcome? And I'm watching this in order to have a balanced assessment. And I'm watching some key factors that I look at to determine, how am I balancing out this discussion? So there's some key factors. So one is voter turnout. Close elections often hinge on voter turnout. High or low turnout can sway results significantly. So in Georgia, we have around 7 million registered voters. In 2020, there was about 4.9 million votes cast. So out of that 7 million registered voters, about 4.9 million votes were cast here in the state of Georgia. In 2020, the state at the time saw a high level of engagement in 2020, which is not abnormal when you talk about a presidential year. And then we became a battleground state. Why did we become a battleground state or a swing state? Because we have, traditionally Georgia has been red, but now after 2020, when Biden won, it swung. So now it can swing back or it can stay in the blue. So that's what makes us a swing state or a battleground state. Well, during the 2022 midterms, we saw a bit of a turnout with around 3.8 million voters participating. So 4.9 million in 2020, 3.8 in 2022 during the midterms. And the 2024 preliminary indicators suggest that there will be high levels of voter engagement. However, we have to ask ourselves, who are these voters? And due to Gen Zers increasingly becoming more and more engaged in politics, I think it's safe to say that the Generation Z will become a really high, will have a high turnout at some point in this election cycle. I'm also watching our swing in our battleground states outside of Georgia. So currently Harris is leading in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and North Carolina, just to name a few. And both candidates are tied in Georgia and Arizona. So that's really interesting as well. But again, the margin of error is like sometimes 2 to 3%. So you just don't know, right? Like you really don't know. And when we say margin of error, what we're referring to is there's a percentage of votes that, or a little percentage that could tweak this outcome. So it could be either a plus 3% for either candidate or a negative 3% if the margin of error is 3%. So if you see a poll that says, oh, and I always encourage people to look at the margin of error. So if you're watching TV and a poll pops up in the bottom in the small print, you should see where it says margin of error plus or minus. It's like plus / minus, whatever, right? 2.9, 3. If it's more than 3%, I typically just kind of push it to the side because I'm like, what's going on here? But if it's at 3% and then you see that the candidates are within 3%, that's something to take note of as it relates to really paying attention to that, right? That means that it could be either candidate can have more than 3. It can be, if let's say Trump is at 43% and Harris is at 46%, it could be that he's really at 46% and she's at 49%. Or it could be that she's at 43% and he's at 40%. It really doesn't, I don't know. Or it could mean that Trump is at 46% and she's at 46%. So it's just keep that margin of error in your mind because that definitely is an indicator. That being said, I use polling along with other methods to track elections because polls can be inaccurate, as I just explained. And then, the margin of error is really, really tricky, especially if they don't take account for likely voter turnout or let's just say they're tracking people who typically vote, but we're going to have an influx of new voters. So it can really go different ways. But if you take into account momentum or the lack thereof, as well as polling, as well as take into account the campaign strategies, debate performance, media coverage, endorsements of key figures, and overall voter sentiment on key issues, if you add all of that together, then I feel like you find yourself in a position where you can say that you have a good picture of what's going to happen during the 2024 election cycle. All right, so let's talk about JD Vance. So who is JD Vance, right? I'm going to give you the basic backstory because I think some people need that. So JD Vance, according to his bio, that he's an American author or politician. Not his bio. Let me not say that. This is according to just my research. I kind of put all this stuff together, and this is the gist of who he is. So he's an American author, politician. He was born as James David Vance. So that's what the D stands for, David, in 1984. And he is 40 years old right now. He was born in Middleton, Ohio. He graduated with the undergraduate education from Yale University, which is interesting. I used to live a few steps from there, I should say. My dad would get up. He used to walk to Yale Hospital when he was working there and we lived in Connecticut. But anyway, so he went to Yale University. He earned a degree in political science. He attended Yale Law School where he earned his JD or his Juris Doctor. He is an author of the book, which was a best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy. And let me tell you, the movie is good. The movie is good. And I don't care what no one says, the movie is good. You cannot like JD Vance, but the movie's good. So I recommend watching it. It was a really interesting movie. But anyway, it dropped in 2016. And the book itself explores the upbringing of him being in a working class family, an Appalachian family, and the challenges they face in that region. So that being said, as it relates to work, he worked in venture capital as and has been involved in various business ventures. He is a member of the United States Senate. He represents Ohio. Like I said earlier, he was elected in 2022. And his political views seem to have fluctuated a little bit. I don't know if he was a Republican before and just didn't like Trump, or if he was a Democrat and didn't like Trump. But either way, it kind of fluctuated. He did not support President Trump originally. He was very vocal about how he felt about the president. And there are a lot of people who have spoken with him while he was in college, and just they had a lot to say. I'll just say that they had a lot to say. So, so that's that. But now, why are we here? Why did he find himself in hot water now? Because I think we got over the fact that he was a never Trumper, right? And let's just talk about that for a second. If we're going to get over the fact that he is a never Trumper, then we have to get over the fact that there are never Trumpers, period, right? You can't be mad at some and okay with him. This is why I wish, particularly as Republicans, we would stop with the labeling, because the labeling causes you to find yourself in a position where one day they're a rhino, the next day they're not, and then the next one day you're hating all the never Trumpers, and then now you're happy to have one as our vice president. It just looks really bizarre, and I just think that we need to calm down with the labeling and the names. Anyway, Vance has taken a deep red stance, highlighting the need to restore families and love for family. And I don't disagree with that at all. I very much so believe in strong families, and that we do need to restore our families. And I do think that Democrats kind of put a sour taste in people's mouths about marriage and family. And I don't think that's a good thing by any means. And with everything that's going on with our children, from medications to puberty blockers and just all that stuff, major surgeries, and growing up in single parent homes, I certainly am not opposed to placing an emphasis on having strong families. However, Vance has decided to take a very controversial approach to this discussion and this argument. And I have a bit of a compilation of him talking about it. So take a listen.
Saying is that we're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
In May of 2019, he told a crowd, quote, "Babies are good because we're not sociopaths."
I've seen people who become more attached to their communities, to their families, to their country because they have children. So I would say that we should care about declining fertility, not just because it's bad for our economy, but because we think babies are good. And we think babies are good because we're not sociopaths.
Then in November of 2020, during a podcast appearance, he said this.
There's just these basic cadences of life that I think are really powerful and really, really valuable when you have kids in your life. And the fact that so many people, especially in America's leadership class, just don't have that in their lives, I worry that it makes people more sociopathic and ultimately our whole country a little bit less less mentally stable. And of course, you talk about going on Twitter. Final point I'll make is you go on Twitter, and almost always the people who are most deranged and most psychotic are people who don't have kids at home.
In August of 2021, in a fundraising email, CNN found he appealed to donors by mentioning the, quote, radical childless leaders in this country. And then he tweeted in 2021, quote, cat ladies must be stopped.
I know the media wants to attack me and wants me to back down on this, Megan, but the simple point that I made is that having children, becoming a father, becoming a mother, I really do think it changes your perspective in a pretty profound way. This is something, of course, we've recognized for hundreds of years in this country, that human civilization has always recognized. But there's a deeper point here, Megan. It's not a criticism of people who don't have children. I explicitly said in my remarks, despite the fact the media has lied about this, that this is not about criticizing people who, for various reasons, didn't have kids. This is about criticizing the Democratic Party for becoming anti-family and anti-child. We have to ask ourselves, Megan, why do we have masking of toddlers years after the pandemic ended? Why do we have the Harris campaign coming out this very morning, Megan, and saying that we should not have the child tax credit, which lowers tax rates for parents of young children? It's because they have become anti-family and anti-kid. And I'm proud to stand up for parents, and I hope that parents out there recognize that I'm a guy who wants to fight for you. I want to fight for your interests. I want to fight for your stake in the country, and that is what this is fundamentally about. The Democrats in the past 5-10 years, Megan, they have become anti-family. It's built into their policy. It's built into the way they talk about parents and children, and it's time that we called that out. I don't think we should back down from it, Megan. I think we should be honest about the problem.
So I pulled this compilation and I realized that when I was listening to Kim Iverson, she talked a lot about this as well. And she also has this compilation in her podcast. However, I'm linking her podcast in the bio for two reasons. One, I want to make sure if I pull from anybody that I promote them. But then secondly, she had a really good explanation on this topic as well. She, like me, have had some fertility challenges. So she's like really, it was just a really good explanation. I suggested you go check it out. So make sure after you finish watching this podcast, you check out the link in the bio and listen to her podcast because it was really good. So I thought long and hard about JD Vance and the attacks on his previous statements. And as a woman who myself who has experienced fertility challenges, as I mentioned before, it's not that the comments per se affect me or that that's what's concerning to me is the comments per se. It's really the response to it after being educated on the fact that this is something that can be really hurtful and bothersome to a lot of women. I felt like his response was a bit neglectful and just quite frankly a bit reckless. It doesn't feel like he has any compassion. It's more so like, well, I'm not talking about that. Well, how do we know that? How do we know that? And when you consider the fact that approximately 20 to 25% of women of childbearing age are childless, when you consider the fact that the CDC has shown that 10 to 15% of women who are childless are childless due to infertility challenges, and then you factor in the fact that 42% of women supported Trump in 2020, opposed to 47% of women supporting George W. Bush in 2004, I don't think we're trending in the right direction when we're making negative comments about women who are childless. I don't think we're trending in the right direction. I don't think it makes sense to turn off almost 50% of your overall support amongst women, because that's really what you're doing when you single out this group of women. And I think these statements serve as an add-on to the already apprehensive female voter that is considering this ticket at large. I think there are a lot of women who are just really apprehensive about how they feel about this Republican ticket. And I believe JD could be a contributing factor and almost a cause of the stagnation in Trump's poll. You would think that bringing on a VP candidate would cause him to kind of rise a bit in the polls, because now you have someone else that's bringing in their support. So I think JD needs to stay away from the comments referring to women and women reproduction. And I'm not talking about abortion, because abortion has nothing to do with reproduction. And it's actually really demeaning to lump people who are choosing to abort, which in the definition of the word means to get rid of. I think it's really difficult for us who may have experienced fertility challenges to hear you say that abortion is some form of reproduction. It's not. You're not reproducing anything. Abortion is not reproductive health. It is not reproduction. It is abortion. It is taking away. It is killing babies. So I take offense to that, particularly for women like myself who have had these experiences, because, you know, abortion would never be an idea in our brains because we'll be just happy to reproduce. So I think it's just important to notate that. So why would you add someone who is so controversial, who has these controversial statements? Because I find it hard to believe that the Republican base did not know, or the Republican campaign did not know about these before they selected him. I'm sure it came up in vetting. However, why would you pick him? Why would you pick him? Like, what does he bring to the table with all this controversy? Well, thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. I think you bring him because President Trump was losing evangelical voters. And the reason why is because at one point you had Mike Pence on the ticket, but now you don't, right? So Mike Pence is now off the ticket. And I think that they were losing evangelical voters. And this isn't about winning the woman vote. So I don't think he cares about so much how the woman feels in this, because it's not about the woman vote. You're not trying to win the woman vote with this statement. In fact, I believe that it's really more so about winning the evangelical vote. And currently, I heard that about 40 to 50% of evangelicals are on the fence or considering not voting at all. And so that's a much needed voting block that we have to have as Republicans if we think we're going to win. You got to maintain that base as well. So I must conclude that I'm not sure if adding JD Vance to the ticket is a winning strategy, because I think that he was brought to the ticket for the evangelicals, but it feels like he's kind of turning off the woman vote. So I'm not quite sure about that. But I also find it hard to pick up voters with this extremely targeted messaging, right? This messaging causes you to create opposition as well as, you know, to pick up some support in the evangelicals. So it's just not broad enough where you can maintain several or juggle several different bases or voting blocks, right? It's one of those things where you're really doing targeted effort here to win back these evangelicals. And maybe they feel like, looking at their numbers, maybe they feel like that's all they need and that they've already kind of discounted the woman vote. I'm not sure. However, I think these are the times when you have to stick to messaging, and we need to stick to messaging that encompasses as many people as possible and try to stay away from those subjects that are extremely complex or lacks proper context. So if it's too complex or lacks proper context, I think it's important that we stay away from those things. So that being said, I think this is a perfect time for me to kind of talk about our opposition, which is Vice President Kamala Harris, as she has a host of issues herself that I believe supersedes the word salads and the misinformation that everyone talks about. I think it's a little silly to rely on that or to make that part of the focus. So let's talk about her a little bit. So who is she, right? So I'm going to give you the same kind of background rundown that I gave you about JD Vance. So who is she? So she's also a politician. She's an attorney, currently serving as Vice President of the United States. Her husband is also an attorney. My husband thought, I can't even believe, he was like, I can't even believe we're at a point where we have two attorneys that could possibly be the president and the second gentleman, I think his name, he would be, whatever. I just was like, oh my God, no shade to attorneys, but no. Mm-mm. But we'll get into that. Anyway, she was born October 20th, 1964, which, I mean, that makes her about 60 this year. And she does look good. We cannot shade her on that. She's from Oakland, California. But yeah, she looks good for 60. She really does. She graduated from Howard University with a degree in political science and economics. Howard University is a HBCU, a historically Black college. I went to a HBCU. Some of you already know that. Aggie Pride, North Carolina A&T. But anyway, she went to Howard University. She has a degree in political science and economics. She also earned her JD from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. She entered politics as a deputy district attorney in Alameda, if you're in California, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but Alameda County, California, where she focused on prosecuting cases of violent crime. In 2010, Harris was elected as the Attorney General in California. She was then elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016, representing California. And in 2020, Harris was elected Vice President of the United States of America alongside Joe Biden. So clearly, she is an educated professional politician. Clearly. She's pretty much moved through the ranks quietly, if you go back through what I just said. But why isn't that getting the traction in the polls? Why aren't we seeing her really growing heavily in the polls? Because you would think with that type of attribute, I mean, and her her educational past, you would think that a lot more people would see her as qualified, so to speak. So why? What's happening? And it's because critics are questioning her record as a California Attorney General. There are a lot of people who are just not ready to have a female president. There are people who are concerned when they look at the fact that we have so many wars going on right now. And a lot of these wars are taking place in countries like, for instance, when you look at Hamas in Iran and as well as Russia, those are three different areas, three different territories, I guess you could say, two countries, one little area, but they are so anti-woman. They have no respect for a woman leading anyone, more or less men. So that alone is going to be a challenge. That alone is going to be a challenge, right? Like, how are we negotiating this? How are we going to negotiate this when you have countries where the leaders just have no respect for you simply because you're a female? Anyway, but between that and her attorney general record, she has some stuff. She has some questions that need to be answered, and I think that her stance on certain sentencing policies as an attorney general has really played a major role. We've been critical about her work as the border czar as well, which they're now saying that never happened, that she was never the border czar, which I think is so bizarre because
border czar. Vice President Harris was not a border czar.
Meantime, Vice President and border czar Kamala Harris facing some backlash.
What he said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar.
And this will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
People are going to have to counter the misinformation. You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
They were very critical of Kamala Harris, especially in her role as border czar.
Now what she's up against is folks lying about her border record, calling her a border czar.
Kamala Harris, who was appointed as the border czar.
The Biden team didn't declare her the border czar. They wanted her to work on kind of the root causes of immigration.
There has been so much criticism against Kamala Harris. You know, she was the border czar.
Calling her sort of the border czar, which wasn't necessarily the case.
So the border, if they weren't planning to.
So there you have it. Clearly, she was the border czar. Either way, there's also a lot of perceived mishaps and lack of effective communication. You know, just the cackling on and all the word salads, and and I get it. Sometimes you're trying to think about what you want to say, and you're just using a bunch of filler words. But you have to be mindful of that. It just sounds ridiculous. So there's been a lot. But I personally don't have confidence in her ability to restore our economy. So while I have some other things to say about some of the other stuff that people are concerned about too, I guess I would say my number one concern right now is that I do not feel like she has the ability to restore our economy. She doesn't have a platform, or in some of the points that she's already brought out about the $25,000. So apparently the $25,000 that she says she wants to give every first-time home buyer, they comes with some stipulations, right? I heard that you had to also have a record of not missing 1 month of rent or being late on your rent for 2 years straight. And it's just some other stuff too that looks like it's more for Hispanics than Americans who've been here. It just kind of looks for those who are really starting out for the first time. I don't know. It's just really interesting. So that we heard about, her, wanting to just provide for for the people, American people financially. I mean, it's just all this stuff that costs a lot of money. I don't know. And then she appears to be a flip-flopper on some major issues. Her standing with the pro-Hamas supporters, so to speak, early on, and kind of being quiet about it. And now she's, standing with Israel. I know her husband is a Jew, and I know he has always been pushing for, Jewish stuff and anti-Semitism and all that. But I don't know. I think she was a little quiet. So not to mention the Democrat Party handpicked her as the nominee, ignoring the convention process. There are many who feel like they supported the vice president, but they didn't support her as president. They were cool with her being Biden's vice president, but they're not cool with her being the vice president. So when you think about all of that stuff, there's a lot that she is happening with her. But much like the Trump administration, who seems to be expanding the tent by increasing minority votes, it appears that Harris has a little bit of a trick up her sleeve as well, by selecting Tim Walz as her vice president, who is 10 times worse than she is as it relates to her progressive policies. We all know the one about him supporting putting feminine products such as tampons in the male bathroom, which was so baffling to me because my brain just doesn't even compute that. I was just trying to figure out why do boys need tampons? But then I'm like, oh, I think it's for the girls who are now identifying as a boy, but you're still a girl, so you need tampons. So I don't know, but either way, that's just ridiculous. And so he's that. And I think he plans on trying to go after the blue collar communities. He's kind of trying to paint himself as this regular person like everybody else, but okay. However, he also speaks to another audience that, again, I think sometimes as Republicans, we're ignoring a little bit too much because they're growing up, they're becoming a part of the game, and that's Generation Z. I will be considered Generation Y or millennial, and we are really involved now in politics because we're much older. We're being impacted by policies. Well, they're starting to come into that as well. So he speaks to younger voters, believe it or not, and he claims to have worked this regular job, that he doesn't have any stocks or corporate affiliation, and that he supports social issues that are driving many of these discussions amongst our young people. So that being said, she's going to have to try to define herself apart from Joe Biden every step of the way. And I think that's what this Democratic National Convention is going to be all about, and has been since I've been watching it, as we're in the middle of it right now. Either way, looking at the polling, I think both candidates are in a fight of their lives. And I personally believe that the threat to winning the White House is neither themselves or any of these attacks that I mentioned. I think these things play a role. I think it definitely chips away at their support, or it can add to, in some cases, the other side, depending on how people receive it. But I personally believe that there is a greater culprit that we have to pay attention to. So I really want to jump into that and start talking about what that is. So what is this greater culprit that I believe that both the Harris and the Trump administration have to overcome? Well, I believe it's voter apathy. No matter what side of the aisle that you sit on, voter apathy is the reason why polls, I believe, are stagnated, why yards are void of yard signs, and why it feels like the momentum is seemingly so low. As I mentioned before, going to this general election before the big switch, we saw that 70% of voters said that they prefer two different candidates, while we ended up with Trump and now Harris. There's still some challenges around independents wanting to get behind either one of these candidates, because Harris is still a part of the administration, whether you like it or not, and then Trump is still Trump. And then I mentioned that 40 to 50% of evangelicals were considering not voting. And then there's this uncommitted movement that's also threatening to sit out the election and not support Kamala, and that would deeply impact her because a lot of those that are part of that uncommitted are younger people, are people that she will need in order to maintain her base. So if you're wondering why this election feels so different, I believe it's because both parties are fighting against the whole idea of having to maintain their base. Traditionally, you would have your base. The Republicans will have theirs, the Democrats will have theirs, and you didn't have to worry about any of this. But now it's just really different. Both parties are fighting to maintain their base while also trying to pick up new voters. And in case they're unable to energize their base, they're hoping that these new voters will somehow serve that purpose. But is that a good thing? I mean, I personally see it as a bad thing for partisanship, but I think it's a great thing for we, the people. I think that as voting blocks are starting to intertwine, you're starting to see people who originally supported Bernie Sanders is now supporting President Trump. We're seeing Republicans who were hardcore MAGA people now supporting Kamala. We're seeing people like Candace Owens, who was so outside of the progressive side. I mean, young people hated her now because she's kind of aligned a little bit with the pro-Palestinian push. You see that they're starting to support her. So there's like this huge intertwining that's happening, and it's happening publicly and on Front Street, right? So when you see these things starting to happen, particularly when you look at like Black voters that are now moving into the swing vote space, and BLM leaders who have turned on Kamala Harris, I think it's okay to note that the old way of campaigning has changed, and it's changed by a lot. I was listening to Obama and Michelle as they were giving their speech at the conventions. And what I found to be fascinating about their speeches is that it was very much so heavily on the side of trying to check their base. It was them telling them to be nicer, to understand that older people may not understand what you're talking about if you're a Gen Zer. It's have patience. I heard a lot about, regardless of how you feel, Trump is better than Kamala's better than Trump. And, it was just more of them trying to redirect the mindsets of their base. And I find that to be quite interesting. So I think in order to navigate all of this, I think we have to first take our place as we, the people. We have to take a close look at the current state of where we are as the people. Where are we financially? Where are we educationally? Where are we when it comes to healthcare and all those other key issues that we know are on the table? Like, where are we? Where do we stand on these issues as a person? And I think we need to take a close look at the platforms only of these candidates so that we can build and have a good understanding of capability as well as confidence, right? Who is capable of doing this, and are we confident that they can get the job done? And I must say, out of the two, Kamala does not give me the confidence that I need in order to believe that she can get us out of our current state. Where are we currently? We're currently in a recession. For those of you who are saying we're not in a recession, no, we are absolutely in a recession, and it can get worse. When me and my husband were dating, now this was in 2019-ish, maybe. No, we got married in 2019. So let's just say 2018. So in 2018, we're going through our dating experience. So there were like several restaurants that became like our little favorite restaurants, kind of like our staple, our little spots when we think about our dating experience. And I look back at it, and there are times now when we want to go and visit some of those restaurants that we visited while we were dating. And out of all the restaurants we visited, only one is still standing. Only one is still standing right now. And what do I mean by that? Most of them have closed down after COVID, and then some of them closed down post-COVID as we were going through this really rough stage of trying to get people back to work and things of that nature. So the economy is not in a good place, and it can get a whole lot worse. So I must say, my confidence in Kamala's ability to bring us back and get us back on track, it's just not there. There's nothing in her background that gives me faith in her economic acumen. I don't know what she knows. And when we have two wars underway and the culprit are leaders who have very little respect for female leaders, that gives me pause as well. So whether you agree or you disagree, it really doesn't matter. The progressive agendas, it just does not prevail outside of this country. They are trying, but it's just not going well. In other countries, you stand up and decide that you want to have an LGBTQ parade, they all may be murdered. That's just how it is in certain countries. So Trump, on the other hand, has to maintain the lead that he has, and he's gotten that lead through through being strong economically and being strong on economic issues. So he has shown us that foreign leaders, they do respect his strength enough to not initiate conflict. There were no wars while he was president at all. So they obviously have some type of respect for him. They may not be a fan, and I know that his base is not a fan of war, but it's also, the base also understands that sometimes it's necessary in some cases. So it's a tough pill to swallow, but the facts are the facts, and they're right in front of us. And I just cannot make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. We've got to pay attention to what's happening right now. And as I said before, I'm going to tell you what I think. If I had to decide right now, as of today, in August of 2024, it looks like Kamala Harris has more of a momentum. It looks like Kamala Harris may be able to win people over come November. Why? Because while Republicans are stronger on economic issues, what we struggle in is explaining how our economic plan or strategy can actually turn into a tangible action that can cause voters to see a change quickly. A lot of our policies, they are perfect because they create sustainable change. It means that you'll have longer periods before we see a recession, longer periods of stability rather than these ebb and flows. And we have money, and then we don't have money. Businesses are going good, and then they're not doing good. You don't see as much of that when it comes to Republicans. However, our strategies are a slow turn that puts us on the right direction. And it's just more sustainable that way. We would prefer not to be that way, but that's just how it is. Republicans have to communicate that. We've got to figure out how to say that. Democrats, they're all about addressing the need up front with these strategies that creates instability. Handing over checks, handing out free money, cutting over here and pulling over there. She's talking about raising corporate tax from 21% to 28%. The moment I read that to my husband, you know what he said to me? He was like, okay, well, there's going to be higher unemployment because labor is your salaries. That carries the bulk of the weight of your budget when you're a business owner. So the first place you go when your revenue is slowing down, because here's the thing, revenue may be slowing down. And even if revenue is up, but if your costs go up, which is what happens when you increase the corporate tax from 21% to 28%, when that cost goes up, then you're going to find yourself in a worse situation, because now I got to figure out how to meet my demands by having the same amount of revenue with higher costs. That means that my labor cost needs to go down. So that means they're now going to start laying people off. The quality of the products that you're purchasing is going to go down because now you have to look for shortcuts or cheaper versions of what you offer. So it's not like raising the corporate tax is somehow going to be like, okay, everything stays the same. No, businesses are not ran like that. You have to have the revenue to keep the business generated. So as I stated before, man, these are tough pills to swallow, but it's just not going to work. If Republicans can't figure out how to communicate effectively our economic plan, and if Democrats are out here selling these magic pills, these promises they always sell, if the voters are willing to eat it up again and not do their research or not consider that, you know what, I want to have a sustainable return. I am willing to slowly turn back into the right and into a place of strength if it means that I can stay there longer. That's how you have to look at the difference between the Republican economics and the Democrat economics. Do I want a quick fix right now, or do I want something that is going to allow me to be able to sustain? Do I want the quick fix, or do I want the sustainable fix? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I want you to really let me know in the comment section what you think about the economic plans of the Republican versus the economic plan of the Democrat. I'm really interested to know what your stance is. I want to hear it. How did you feel about President Obama's speech? You know, how did you feel about Michelle Obama? I don't know. Just let me know. Thank you so much for listening. This is Extra 106.3, and this is the Janelle King Show. And I'm so grateful to have you at my table. Till next time,